Fine. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and let me take over the screen.
If everybody can mute for now, and then Izabela, we'll just see how things go. But if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat, and then we'll just see if we need to break to make sure that everybody's able to get what they need out of this talk. So thank you. Go ahead, Izabela.
Sure. So I'm going to discuss tonight the project Body as a Negative, and I started working on it in 2016 and presented it in a final form as my MFA thesis at the Rhode Island School of Design in 2019. And it consists of an installation that shows a relation between photographs, unique glass pieces that are merged with negatives, and medical lights. It's also taking a form of a photo book where 33 photographs are divided into 5 chapters, where the written component is also present. And the project focuses on turning the camera inward, under the skin, into the notion of self, trying to understand the body and the self. The need to start this project occurred in 2016, once my dad was diagnosed with the 4th stage cancer. And at the time of his diagnosis, I was living in New York while he was in Poland. And once getting this news, my body was put on notice. I was worried about my dad and his health. And at the same time, this information brought back all my memories and anxieties from my own history of being a patient with a rare tumor that I encountered when I was 19 years old. And there were moments when I was afraid to leave my room and go into the city. I was afraid that my body was made of glass and that it could shatter at any time. And very quickly, I made this decision to come back to Poland to be with my dad, to support him. But I also knew that I had to start listening to my own body and to undergo some kind of healing, as my body was begging for attention. And I had to regain the balance and the control that this news brought up into my body. And I started looking at myself and examining myself through the camera lens. My relationship with technology, and the camera in particular, was coined once I came to the hospital in Warsaw with internal bleeding. And this internal bleeding revealed a much bigger problem in my body, an interorgan tumor. It was a very rare one. At the time, there were only around 300 cases worldwide, and I was actually the first one in Poland. Science had few answers to the cause and how to proceed. Therefore, I was kept for some time in the hospital, waiting for the right decisions to be made. And this experience of being on view, researched and scanned, coined my relationship with the camera and ways of seeing a human. While being scanned by ultrasound or tomography at the hospital, I was intrigued, and that was probably the moment when I started thinking about the similarities and differences between medical equipment and my own camera while looking at the human body. Right after I came back home from the hospital, after the first surgery, I took photos of my changed body as I wanted to see myself and also to have this document of myself. And that was something that I was doing periodically when I felt that there was something off with it. And this need to see myself from an outside perspective to examine myself was a result of this experience of being a patient on view. Reflecting on what actually happened in the past to me as a patient, I came to a feeling and to an understanding that medical procedures performed upon my body during the initial 9-hour surgery, which is a very long time to be cut open, and it's a big threat for the body, that those procedures function as a living archive, a photographic negative in my body and in my life, and that they produce images, including the photographs that create this body of work. And I, kept thinking that deep somatic memory is called to visibility in this work, and it's externalized through the photographic surface. And from one of my therapists, from actually a psychotherapist, I heard and I learned that sources of pain and of anxiety can be held in unseen layers of the unconscious and subconscious mind, and that those memories can be located throughout the body in all kinds of cells, not only in the brain, and that they are called cellular memories. And it's an idea that is still being investigated, and there is still no clear and definite answer how that works and when it actually happens. But for now, what is known is that cellular memory is framed in the context of traumatic memory and ways in which the body responds to recall a memory. And, I am not a scientist. I'm really unable to say what exactly happens on this biological cellular level. But I definitely, once I heard about this theory, it made total sense for me. And I felt, just that in certain body parts, the memories were coming back. I would feel something, similar or exactly the same as I did in the past. And for example, I felt when I was in a stressful situation that those traumatic memories would just open up as if I was again in the hospital and as if I again was fighting for my life. So I felt that I had this really hypersensitive internal alarm system, which could activate even in harmless situations. And serious about understanding my body, I started to understand and to turn the lens of attention on it. And once I shared this theory about cellular memory, one of the teachers at RISD referred this book to me, The Body Keeps the Score, written by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who is one of the world's foremost experts on trauma. He has spent over 3 decades working with survivors. And in this book, he shows the research and the scientific advances to present how trauma literally reshapes both body and the brain, compromising sufferers' capacities for pleasure, engagement, self-control, and trust. And he saw that those survivors, they were really more stuck in the past and unable to be fully in the present moment. And that was sometimes how I felt as well. And he explored innovative treatments that could offer new paths to recovery by activating, the brain's natural neuroplasticity. But what he saw, what the research shows from his end, is that to rework this trauma, the body should also be active and be present. So it's like an extension of thinking only about sitting and talking about trauma in a room with a therapist, and adding, as a successful therapy, also the activation of the bodily and cellular component. And he gave, some examples of it, like sports, drama, yoga. It could be also dance, where the body and mind could meet and rework the trauma. And his insight cohered with the therapeutic process that I was, doing with the photography intuitively. And I chose from this book this quote that I thought in a beautiful way speaks about the healing process. Accurate mirroring feels completely different from being ignored, criticized, and put down. The scene you recreate in a structure may or may not be precisely what happened, but it represents the structure of your inner world. In order to change, people need to become viscerally familiar with realities that directly contradict the static feelings of the frozen or panicked self or trauma, replacing them with sensations rooted in safety, mastery, delight, and connection. And the act of mirroring was also really central to my recovery. The camera became a witness to moments of replaying difficult experiences under my own conditions and on my own terms. And each print started functioning as my mirror. That's how I felt, looking at the results of my photographic work. And I realized that subconsciously, very often I was taking photographs of myself where I was lying down and the camera was above me, looking down on me, almost replacing the caregiver, such as a nurse or a doctor, like on this image here. And in this image, I also have the trigger, the symbol of power and control. And for me, that indicates that I become both the patient and the caregiver. And this picture here led me directly into making this one, where I actually do reperform the first fast surgery that I had. And in this process of reperforming this tumor removal, I set up a table with a green medical sheet in my studio space. And I was lying down with my knees up, trying to break the passiveness of the body. I shifted the memory of being cut open by looking at the scar that was reflected in a mirror, searching for the wholeness. And I used these blue surgical gloves holding the oval mirror. And these blue gloves refer to the initial event, as well to the act of touching something that needed to be investigated in order to render it familiar. I felt that I needed to investigate the integrity of my own body again and again in order to regain the strength in my identity. And also the direct light was placed upon my body, a patient and a specimen. I was taking this photograph for a week, and it was important for me to reperform it as long as I needed before I could move on. So the camera offered to me this reflective process. And in the act of replay, I felt that I became both a surgeon, positioning the camera from an analytical perspective to look at myself, to examine myself, and at the same time, the patient, reflecting upon the feelings that were catalyzed in my body. The difference is that instead of like surgical scissors, the camera offered me this possibility to merge my identity and to enable a ritual of healing. And that's, what I hope by returning to these memories and performing them, I aim to transform them on a cellular level so my body could regain balance. And I was recreating the traumatic memories as a patient in a safe, private or semi-private space of the studio. And that was a crucial thing for me, that this space was private and I could feel safe there and I could confront the memories that were difficult. And in setting the studio stage, I assembled a hospital room and the surgical apparatus. And in this photograph, I am reenacting the memory of awaiting the surgery. And I wanted to have it remembered in a much warmer and nicer space than it actually took place in. So I painted my studio walls pink and added some things on the wall to fill in the emptiness of the space. And I went to the actual medical space a couple of times, but I found out that what I was mainly interested in there was how the light operated there and how I could use that metaphorically to speak about the experience. Also, like thinking about how my identity was not important in the hospital surrounding, how it was not important who I was. I felt this need to subvert it, to subvert this feeling and this experience. And in this photograph, I hope to shift the anonymity and the uniformity that is shed upon patients. So even though I don't show my face, which could be like a big disclosure of my identity, I feel that in this photograph, myself is present in this act of turning the medical sheet into a dress. And as I was taking, the full control of the image making process, I became simultaneously the object, the subject, and the photographer. And this process was personal, subjective, and very intuitive. I was going back and forth between the lens and the viewfinder to see if what was captured matched actually what I felt. And sometimes I photographed myself triggered by hospital reference objects, which became those indexes for memories from the medical treatment. Like in this image here that I took in my bathtub, where the blue drape reminded me of those feelings of hopelessness that I experienced in the hospital bathroom. As you know, after my surgeries, my body felt very weak and in pain. And it was also almost like impossible for me to take care of it, including basic, functions like taking a bath or shower. And I needed external help for that. And trying to rework those emotions, I was sitting in this bathtub, hoping, to rewrite it and to perform the body wash performance. But instead, those feelings returned so strongly, feelings of hopelessness, that I was just sitting for several hours in the bathtub, allowing myself to meditate on those emotions. And I decided to include this photograph that accepts this lack of body wash performance. This photograph shows a replay of the second surgery that I had. And within the second surgery, I was much more stressed than within the first one, because I knew what kind of pain comes with it, what kind of solitude also comes with it. And I was quite afraid of what the results might bring. And making this photograph, I really wanted to emphasize the much bigger need to take control. And that's why I used way more mirrors, so I could see and control my body from many angles. And coming back to this link between medical equipment and photography, I started looking at the devices that are used in the medical setting, for example, microscopes. And I was curious how to use them and how to use, this insight into the body. And I decided to use photographic negatives as a stand-in for my bodily material that would be analyzed by a scientist or by a doctor. By making this double exposure image of the vessels, I thought of an X-ray. And I am really fascinated with the vessels, as they are, this proof of someone's existence, of their physical being. And in my work, they become a metaphoric stand-in for a body, for my body. I use them very often. Here is another one. And this one I made thinking about the pain that is, combined with the surgeries. And I used a crop to metaphorically present this idea and the pain. So, having this photographic focus on using the camera at my body and self, at some point, I literally placed the camera as my head, pointing from my perspective on my body. And I looked at the unbalanced view of my torso, exactly of my ribs. And that was, of course, the result of the surgeries. And, looking at it was accepting it. And that was also an important part of the healing process. So this image shows, the same abdominal area from a different outside perspective, showing the scar with all the details. And at that time, I was photographing my scars really a lot. I felt this need to look at the scar, to really accept it as part of me. And in this work, I also used a lot of organic forms, like vessels that you've seen, like fish here, also butterflies and specimens. And they all became stand-ins to express the emotional states that were imprinted upon me, how I felt that they were imprinted. And using those elements from a natural world was very intuitive. But I think it came from the fragility of those elements, as well as the fragility of the human body. And I was very interested in using symbolism and metaphoric language in this body of work. And fish became one of the symbols for a patient that I use in this project, as I, kept thinking about this experience of a fish in a bowl being similar, to an experience of a patient in a hospital where they are isolated, alienated, and on view. So, as I mentioned, I started this project thinking about my dad, but in in the end, I didn't make that many photographs, or like I didn't decide to include that many photographs in the project for few reasons. And most importantly, I felt like I didn't want to expose my dad's intimacy, as he was a much more private person than I am. And from a strong male, he became this vulnerable body. And it was heartbreaking to see him go through this process, and also to show him like that to the rest of the world. So also there was, this aspect that I went back to States at some point, and I was going to Poland and visiting him, but I wasn't all the time with him. But, there were some images like this one that I really wanted to include. And this one shows the healing bath, which was supposed to strengthen his organism. It was this optional treatment during chemotherapy. And it shows obviously the moment of vulnerability. But I also think that it shows, some kind of strength. He's looking for hope, looking for all the options. He's courageous enough to look for all the options, fighting for his life. And I wanted to show and to understand my dad's experience and his perspective. So I was observing him and studying him. And I really, didn't want to become an outsider to his illness and to lose our connection. Therefore, I started placing myself as him. And this photograph is titled "Sitting Up After My Father," where I physically placed myself in his spaces, in his medical bed at home. And I photographed myself as if I were him. It allowed me to process what was happening to him, to better communicate with him and support him. And I was, in this photograph, I was trying to sit up while looking at the medical stockings he had to wear to counter the side effects of the chemotherapy. And even though, I thought that I understood what he's going through, but like after this experience performed for the camera of half lying, half sitting, it forced me to confront the physical limits. But of course, like, I'm sure there was more to that, and only a person who only he could really understand what it was. But that at least brought me somehow closer. I was also looking for signs of his experiences without, putting his vulnerable body into the photograph. And this image here shows, the everyday fight with the medical stockings he had to wear that were uncomfortable. And just like at some point during the day, he would take them off and throw them away. This photograph is titled "Worried," and I am not able to distinguish if I made it replaying my own memory or if I did it, thinking about my father's experiences. It shows the patient being worried about what's next. And it's also a patient who has been a patient for so long, lying in bed, being removed from public and social life, that the boundaries of taking care of the self are pushed. This is titled Lying Still. It's also after my father. And it's a perspective that I would see my dad from sometimes when I would be calling him on Skype or on WhatsApp. And sometimes he would be just so tired or in pain that he wouldn't sit and talk to me, but he kept lying and having his phone in his hands. And probably he didn't think about the perspective that I saw him from. And, you know, it was very hard for me to see him being positioned like that. And at some point, like, I positioned myself, in this place too, because I thought, like, with someone who is so close and so dear to us, who is dying, like, a part of us is, and a part of me was, dying too. And in parallel to my phototherapy practice, I was exploring other healing modalities that could put me and my close ones through these difficult times in our lives. And I was introduced to some innovative treatments, including, herbalism, microkinesis therapy, and tuning forks, which offered, some kind of path to recovery and helped to replace the static feelings frozen in the viscera with this connective sensation, bringing the body into harmony, and body's, nervous system into the harmony. And this work had a clearly profound, healing aspect for me. And I think that this image, in a way, symbolically expresses it. I am photographing an aloe vera, which is, this natural material that has a soothing influence on the skin. It's also, like, often used as a fulfillment to some treatments. And at the same time, this aloe has to be open in order for the scar, which is a sign of an open body, to be closed and healed well. And so I was introduced to tuning forks as a tool that has this possibility to rewrite the cellular memory. And the way the tuning fork works is that, you tap it and direct it towards the body, and it harmonizes the body. And there are a lot of tuning forks. There are therapists who use them, and they, distinguish which kind of tuning fork is for which problem. And that's what I would do. I would just, like, go to such a session with a certified therapist. And that would be very, successful for me, and it helped me really a lot. So I have a few tuning forks that were the most, helpful for me. And they are also, like, really grounded in traditional Chinese medicine, but are non-invasive, and they utilize the acupoints and the body's meridian system. And they actually, I made research about tuning forks working on this project, and they go really way back, in neuroscience and in photography. And I'm showing here some images from my research. They show the documentation of Charcot's experiments with tuning forks on patients at the hospital called Salpêtrière in France, made in the second part of the 19th century. And Charcot is regarded as the founder of modern neurology, but I'm not gonna talk about his advances here. I just wanted, to mention it as it really relates into my work, into this specific one image. So those are made on, those experiments were held with public. There was a documentation, and he chose to work with patients who were called hysterics, who were very sensitive and also susceptible to suggestion. And he saw definitely, the influence and some kind of relationship between mind and body and the tuning forks. But I think, what's really interesting is this dynamic that is happening in these images, where it's a male hand, and we know it's a male doctor who is conducting research on the female body. And I think, with the image that I made, which I made even before seeing this documentation, is that I took the tuning fork into my own hand, and it's like a self-healing act. And also it shows a big, part of this connection and sensation that is so important during the recovery process. And this image here could visualize the photographic process that I underwent. So it's like me looking into a body, here a metaphorical vessel. So the practice of requesting the body and self to be in tune, it opened this dual process. On one hand, there was this spiral inward towards the past. And on the other hand, I was reclaiming my life force. And I was reading also a lot about the perceptions of time. And I found, these two words that can describe time since ancient times, which is chronos, the chronological or sequential time, and kairos, which would be the proper and opportune time for action. And while chronos is quantitative, the kairos is qualitative. And I felt that whenever I was photographing myself, taking self-portraits, that I would be entering this nonlinear sense of time, kairos. And kairos is believed to be a self-nourishing time. And in kairos, there is only the present moment. And to achieve it, we must let go of everything else. And that's what happened to me during this phototherapy process. I was dealing with the past, but in the end, I did have to let go of it and locate myself in my body again, in the present time. This photograph, I also think, is an important one in this project. It shows me, it shows a negative with me, and I'm placed as a specimen among other specimens. And colors also played a big role in working on this project, especially the blue color. And I thought about blue in terms of saying that someone is feeling blue, about this distance and nostalgia that comes, with the idea of color blue. And I also thought about blue being this medical color. And then, I once I read the field guide for getting lost, written by Rebecca Zolnit, I thought it speaks about the blue color in such a beautiful way that I wanted to share it. And I'm gonna like just pick up what I find the most interesting from this quote. The world is blue at its edges and in its depths. The blue is the light that got lost. The color of that distance is the color of an emotion, the color of solitude and of desire, the color of there seen from here, the color of where you are not, and the color of where you can never go. So again, thinking about blue being the color of there seen from here, of the past seen from the present, and also like of this impossibility of reaching it, I felt that I really have to cut the past from myself and from the present times. And while working on body as a negative, I became mesmerized by glass and its transformative capacities. Forming the memories in glass, additionally to my phototherapy practice, felt very urgent. I started making replicas of my abdominal area where my skin became glass without any organs inside. And it was a very physical process. My skin and scar surface were impressed into a negative, translated into a wax positive, and finally into a plaster silica heavy mold that served as a negative for the glass positive. So it was a really long process. It involved external help to get the first body negative from my skin and to carry on the final mold to a kin. But it became, another ritual for me. And at some point, it was even the most important ritual. And of course, that was when I was at RISD and I had an access to this great glass department there. So this is a documentation photograph. And so the fire slammed the glass onto the mold, and in a temperature that would cause ultimate death and scattering of the body into dust, my DNA and the scars were impressed on a glass plate, formed during this process into a body shape. And I was adding negatives onto the glass, experimenting, with this idea of body as a negative and a negative plate. And that felt very transformative. Here we can see the detail of the glass sculpture looked through the medical glass, and I was really interested in the texture. And I think, I focused on both photography and casting, as they both function as a proof of the thing that has been. And they both can be this imprint of oneself, of a memory, and of history. And by both, both in photographing and by rephotographing my scarred abdominal area and in casting this body part and merging with my negatives, I felt that I was really exploring my vulnerability. And for the final presentation of this project, I decided to build up a room, and centrally there is the glass piece placed. It's with the medical light, almost, functioning as an enlarger and a negative for all the positives that are the photographs on the blue walls. And also some of the walls were in the peach color, which referenced to me the skin. And it was like the second most important color in this project for me. And here, as I mentioned, I also made a photo book. It was very exciting for me to work on this form, as I thought that it really, the content really fitted the idea of a book. And I also could include the written component in the book, which was something that I really wanted to work on. I thought, that the text is really important because I could fully transmit the depth of the work, and I could, write there about the cellular memory and to share like a lot of concepts that I don't think I would be able to share otherwise with the viewer. And at the same time, writing about my memories was another way to relieve the trauma. So it was, another way of catharsis. And the writing, it's written like from a subjective point of view, but there are also within some medical descriptions and documents. And, I thought about sharing such a personal story because I was aware of how personal it is, but I thought that I tried to make it as universal as it could be. And I hope that people who were patients themselves or whose close ones were patients, that they could relate to this work, and that in general, people, who experience the fragility of a human body, that they would understand this body of work. And, at the end, besides, this work having a healing process for me, I wanted really to raise empathy towards patients. So I think I'm gonna stop sharing here and would love to, make it a conversation now between us.
Thank you. Were you able to stop sharing?
Yes.
There you go. This is definitely an open time for people to start asking questions. My questions is I do want to know if this work continues, if it feels as urgent as it once did, or if you're on the other, if you're on a different way of thinking and being.
Well, I felt once I graduated from RISD, I felt that it was kind of like a finished work, but then, in this year after I graduated, my dad passed away. So there was this time, and I still worked in a similar way. And I think, naturally it happened and it evolved, but I am unsure if I want to connect this with the body of work that I've shared, or if that's going to be something new. I'm still exploring that.
I'm sorry for the loss of your father.
Yeah.
And it feels like this would be a really interesting conversation and something to experience for medical professionals. Have you presented to doctors and nurses? Has the work been sort of in the view and in the spaces of medical?
No, I showed it, yes, to some doctors that I would know personally, that would be, you know, friends of my parents. They would be always really interested in that, but it was never like showed in a like professional medical context. Yeah, but most of them are really interested in it, but also, like, as I mentioned, the cellular memory concept is not fully like resolved yet, how scientific that is. So I think, you know, that is also like an important factor thinking about that.
I mean, good. There's some questions. Sorry, lots and lots. Great. Let's see, from Nancy. Izabela, you talk about this as phototherapy, but it seems so artistically rendered. How do you balance the artistic and the healing motives in your work? So well done.
Thank you. Well, I love lightning for sure. And every time, you know, that's also like a part of healing for me, to use the light and to put myself in the light. So I think that's basically the major, you know, factor that makes it a fine art work.
From Patricia, was it a long process to decide to confront this through photography? Was it painful to go through this project? Where were you in the project when you realized it was having a positive effect on you?
It was a long process, that is true. Yeah. I started photographing myself at first, and I didn't really understand what I was doing. And I was very unsure about it, especially like as it didn't, there were a lot of photographs, you know, that would look similar because it was this process of performing it to the camera. So at first I wasn't even sure if that's going to become a project or if that's going to become something. But I felt, you know, whenever I was putting myself in front of the camera in the scene, I felt important. And I felt, you know, yeah, it was like this soul nourishing time. I felt, you know, someone, and I felt that I was putting behind all the uniformity, the anonymity, feeling a specimen behind me. So I guess, wait, what was the second part of the question?
Where were you in the project when you realized it was having a positive effect on you?
Well, I think that was when I was in Providence, when I was at RISD. Yeah, when it all, you know, started taking shape, and also through talking about it and through sharing my way of photographing and my way of thinking, that started, you know, defining the work.
Frank, do you want to ask your question?
May I when you were in the hospital or when you were otherwise incapacitated, did you manage to set up a tripod and take pictures, or did you occasionally give the camera to someone else to help you take some of the pictures?
Well, actually, at the hospital, I wouldn't make that many photographs. You know, at the time, I was mainly taking photographs. I mean, I had my cell phone there. I didn't have my camera, so like all the photographs that you've seen, they are the replay of the experiences. I actually am this kind of person that doesn't react as fast sometimes, and like I process things after they happen a lot, you know. So most of this work was, processing the past and finding myself in the present time.
So did you manage to take all of those pictures yourself? Every single
Yes.
one you showed us today?
No, not every single. Sometimes, I would have some help making the composition, or like someone would model for me first and I would take a photograph of me. Sometimes someone would just, pull the trigger, but most of them I took alone, without anyone giving me a hand.
The only reason I ask this is because when I was hospitalized for a month with a serious injury, I could not take pictures, and I had to have my son bring my camera to the hospital, and I'd hand it to people to take pictures of me in a similarly, because my memory was so shot, I needed the camera and the pictures to remind me of what happened later. So that's why I ask. And if you have a website, please leave it on the message thing so we can look up later more
Sure.
about you.
Yes, I do have it.
Thank you.
There's a few more questions and I would like to get through them. Thank you, Brink. Nitsan asks, after going through this photography process, do you feel it is a healing medium? Is it easier to, in a way, to deal with pain, loss, or fear while going through this process through the lens?
Yeah, I mean, for me, definitely. It offers this reflective process, and it's also like allowing me to see myself from a distance. So it's sometimes not as painful, and like it gives me this step back to see a bigger picture, I would say. Yeah.
And Marie asked, how long did the project take to compile?
Well, so first images are taken in 2016, but back then I was not really aware that like what I was doing and how am I going to use them. I started more being more aware that it's a project in 2017 and worked till 2019, but used also the images from 2016. So like I would say 3 years. Yeah.
Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Ron asks, how do you place your work in the tradition of self-portraiture?
Well, definitely I think of Joe Spence making my work, which was also this idea of phototherapy and taking self-portraits and reenacting some difficult memories in order to feel better. So definitely there is that, but I also am very much, inspired by really a lot of self-portraiture artists, and I think, it's really important to like acknowledge that looking into the self doesn't mean necessarily that it's a narcissistic act, that it can be, a very helpful act for those artists who do it because they do have some kind of problems with their selves, So definitely in that, and there are a lot of those. I kind of don't want to name them, but yeah.
Well, I'm just going to ask one more question from Patricia. Thank you, Izabela. Your work is very moving. Did you work with a therapist to help figure out some of the deeper feelings that were affecting you?
Yes. So I was going to a psychotherapist at that time, and she was very, very helpful to me. And she also like referred to me different therapists that could help me, with the bodily aspect. So like to a microkinesitherapist, to a tuning fork therapist, because she also like thought that just us sitting and talking about this would not bring everything into balance and into control. So definitely it was very helpful, but that was again in 2016. And then, I felt much better and I just used it in my work.
Thank you. Well, thank you very, very much.
you.
Izabela. This was a really incredible talk. We appreciate.
Oh wait, let me put the website before we.
Sure, it'll be in the thanks. Thanks everyone tonight for coming. Next week, Priya Kambli is going to be talking about her journey and work. So I hope you'll come back next week.
Yeah, thank you, Izabela, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was my pleasure. Wait, where is the chat?
It's on the bottom.
Don't forget a website.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying.